It's fascinating, isn't it, how debates from ancient Rome, like literally thousands of years ago,
Hmm.
about, say, sacrificing rights for security, they still cause huge arguments now, online,
Oh,
everywhere.
absolutely. You see echoes all the time.
Like that whole conspiracy of Catiline thing back in 63 BCE. It raised exactly these questions, didn't it? Like, how far can you go to stop? Well, terrorists, as they might see them, outside the law.
Yeah, what's the price for feeling safe? It's a tough one.
So today, let's get into some of these key moments in early Roman history. We'll use our sources to try and understand how these beginnings shape things that, well, still seem to matter.
Sounds good.
And for anyone wanting to explore these sorts of complex historical topics, or others, maybe a bit more, there's a great YouTube channel called Mindful Moments.
Oh, right.
Yeah, they use AI for book analysis, but it's really geared towards sparking reflection, critical thinking. Worth checking out.
Good tip.
Anyway, our mission today is pretty clear. Unpack some key events, key ideas from Rome's early days, and see why they still resonate, why they're relevant.
Okay. Well, starting with Catiline, it's actually quite remarkable how much detail we have about that conspiracy.
Right, for something so long ago.
Yeah, the historical record is pretty substantial. We can even pinpoint specific places in Rome where it all unfolded. The Forum, obviously.
Heart of the city.
And monuments like the Tabularium, the state records office. It makes it feel very real.
And Cicero's role is central, isn't it? Exposing the plot.
His famous speeches. And then Catiline being forced to flee Rome, eventually dying in battle. It's all documented.
And that detail really shines a light back on that core dilemma we mentioned. Security versus liberty.
Definitely. Cicero authorizing those summary executions, that was hugely controversial, even then.
People were arguing about whether the threat really justified bypassing the normal legal process.
Exactly. Romans themselves were divided, and it highlights just how important that idea of Roman identity was, summed up in SPQR.
Senatus Populusque Romanus.
The Senate and the Roman people, it wasn't just a catchy phrase, it was the bedrock of their state's legitimacy, a really powerful symbol for centuries.
It's funny how we picture these figures. Sometimes art gives us a skewed view, doesn't it? Macari's painting, for instance.
Oh, right. The dramatic confrontation in the Senate.
Yeah, but Cicero and Catiline weren't like an old wise man and a young rebel. They were both middle-aged, weren't they, in their 40s?
Pretty much. And that Senate meeting, probably much bigger, more packed than the painting suggests. The scale was different.
And what happened to Cicero after he supposedly saved Rome? That's telling, too.
Extremely. He gets this incredible title, Patera Patriae, Father of the Fatherland, a huge honor.
But it didn't last long.
Not at all. Almost immediately, the accusations start flying that he acted illegally, executed citizens without a proper trial, and eventually he's exiled.
Wow. So even saving the state didn't give him a free pass.
No. It shows a real tension in their system. They recognize the danger of unchecked power, even against people they saw as enemies. There was a law specifically against putting citizens to death without trial.
And you see similar arguments later.
Well, yeah, Livy, the historian, writing about much earlier conflicts like with Marcus Manlius, another internal struggle, he uses almost identical phrases. That, quo usque tandem, how long will you abuse our patience?
So these kinds of tensions, and language used to talk about them, they kept recurring.
It seems so. A cyclical pattern, perhaps.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Go right back to the beginnings, the founding of Rome itself. More connections there.
Oh, definitely. Take the legend of Romulus founding the city. It's directly linked to the temple of Jupiter Stator in the Forum.
The same forum where Cicero spoke against Catiline centuries later.
The very same spot, supposedly. The myth has Romulus praying to Jupiter right there to stop his men fleeing from the Sabines. It ties into this core Roman belief in, well, divine help and never giving up.
And then there's the whole Sabine women episode. That's uncomfortable.
It is. Livy tries to spin it, doesn't he? He says the early Romans just needed families. They tried asking for intermarriage connubium first and were refused. So it was supposedly about survival, integration.
But still abduction, right? Not exactly a great origin story from a modern view. Different interpretations even then, I suppose.
For sure. Some saw it as the origin of Roman marriage customs. Others just saw it as, well, mass abduction and rape. There's even a Roman coin depicting it.
And Romulus himself isn't exactly squeaky clean, is he? Killing his own brother, Remus.
No, there's a definite dark side. But interestingly, even with that, he becomes the symbol of Rome. Cicero actually invoked Romulus's precedent when dealing with Catiline.
Really?
Yeah. And that image, the twins suckled by the she-wolf, it became iconic. You find it everywhere, even on coins in faraway places like Chios. It's through exploring things like this, maybe on our discussions here or through resources like mindful moments that you mentioned, that we can really reflect on how societies build these powerful foundation stories.
It seems the Romans were quite deliberate about crafting their image, weaving stories together.
Very much so. Look at how they brought in the myth of Aeneas, the Trojan hero.
Right, trying to link Rome to the older, more prestigious world of Greece and Troy.
Exactly. They came up with these incredibly complicated family trees to connect Aeneas's lineage down to Romulus and Remus, making it all one grand narrative. And Livy, again, he goes along with this version.
But how much of this very early stuff can we actually, prove? What does the archaeology say?
Well, that's where it gets tricky. Dating things from that far back is hard. Pottery styles help.
But it's not precise.
Not always. There are debates about the exact age of finds under the Forum, for example. The honest picture from archaeology is that early Rome was probably, well, pretty ordinary for its time. Just one settlement among many in the region, not obviously special at first.
Okay, so moving past the myths into the time of the kings, is there more solid evidence there?
A bit more, yes.
Yeah.
There's that famous inscription found under the lapis niger, the black stone in the Forum.
What does it say?
It's broken, very hard to read, written in a very early form of Latin, but it clearly contains the letters R-E-X.
Rext.
King.
King.
So it strongly supports the idea that Rome did have a period ruled by kings. Though what the rest of the inscription means is anyone's guess. One theory is it's a warning, maybe, about bringing yoked animals into a sacred space.
The kings feel a bit more real than Romulus, maybe.
Maybe slightly more grounded, but the stories are still full of mythic elements. I mean, you have Servius Tullius, supposedly conceived by a magical fire.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Right. Not exactly verifiable history.
No. But what's interesting is how later Roman writers, like Cicero, looked back at this regal period and credited the kings with setting up fundamental Roman institutions.
Like what?
Things like the calendar, they attributed that to the second king, Numa Pompilius. We actually have found early calendars, like the one from Antium, that show how their timekeeping developed. Also, the census, the link between being a citizen and serving in the army, the idea that wealth should determine political power.
Cicero approved of that.
He certainly approved of Servius Tullius's voting reforms, which were based on wealth classes. He saw it as creating stability. They projected their own republic structures back onto the kings.
Was this purely a Roman development, or was there outside influence? What about the Etruscans?
The Etruscan question. That's a big debate. Rome's last few kings traditionally had Etruscan names, like Tarquinius Priscus and Tarquinius Superbus.
So did the Etruscans take over Rome?
The traditional Roman story is more about influence and individuals gaining power, not conquest. But some modern historians think it might have been closer to an actual Etruscan takeover or period of domination. The patriotic Roman sources would obviously downplay that.
And how did the monarchy end, according to tradition?
With another dramatic, violent story involving a woman, the rape of Lucretia by the son of the last king, Tarquinius Superbus.
So the kingdom begins with the rape of the Sabine women and ends with the rape of Lucretia.
It's a striking, if disturbing, symmetry, isn't it? Lucretia's suicide in shame is presented as the catalyst that sparked the rebellion, leading to the expulsion of the kings and the founding of the Republic. It became a hugely influential story in Western art and literature.
So looking back at this whole early period, what are the main takeaways?
Well, I think a few things stand out. First, those early political conflicts, like Catiline's, but also earlier ones, they really did set the stage for enduring questions about state power, rights, security, stuff we still grapple with.
Right. The issues feel very modern sometimes.
Second, Rome's foundation story is this incredible mix of myth and, well, maybe some history, all woven together, often deliberately, to create a powerful identity.
There are masters of branding almost.
In a way, yes. And third, early Rome wasn't some peaceful, unified state from the start. It was messy, probably quite violent internally, with kings being overthrown, Etruscan influence, major social changes. A lot was going on.
It really does make you pause and think about how any society builds its own story, its origin narrative.
Absolutely. And how those stories, even the parts that are more myth than fact, shape values and institutions for centuries.
So maybe a final thought for people to chew on.
Yeah, perhaps consider this. How do the stories we tell ourselves today about our own origins, our own national myths, continue to influence how we see the world and how we act, both individually and collectively?
Hmm. Something to reflect on. For more explorations like this one, definitely subscribe if you haven't already.
And please share this discussion with anyone you think might find it interesting, history buffs, anyone curious about the ancient world.
You can also support our work. There's a link in the show notes where you can find related materials for purchase.
And most importantly, keep engaging with these ideas. Think critically about history and its complex legacies.